Well, thank you everyone for joining. This is SmartBear Academy, SwaggerHub 101. We're having our second year of our user conference. Last year was our first year, and it was great for those of you who attended. Thank you for joining. We'll be having it again here in Boston. It's going to be in downtown Boston this time. It's October 29th and 30th. And same as last year, we'll be doing 2 days. First day is training, product trainings. We're going to do more targeted learn a skill half-day sessions for products. You can jump in between products and get a lot more exposure. And then the second day will be speaking engagements by customers like yourself and internal SmartBear employees. So we are actively looking for users. Tell us your story, share your experience. I will put into the chat the link for speaker submissions. So we have a couple weeks left for speaker submissions. So get your submission in. If you are selected to speak, you do get a free pass to the conference, which is great. Met myself. You can see Mike on the camera there. I'm going to hand it over to him to go a little bit into SmartBear, our products, the agenda, and get started with the training for you. He has a lot of information for you, so we're going to dive right into it. Thank you, everyone.
All right, awesome. Thanks very much, Dana. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Hawley. I'm a sales engineer over here at SmartBear for the API team, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our SwaggerHub 101 SmartBear Academy class. So before we dive into our agenda today, I just wanted to talk about SmartBear just at a basic level so you're all understanding who we are talking to you today and some of the things that we can offer other than this specific product training course. So SmartBear, we are dedicated to helping teams, much like yourselves, provide tools for your development, testing, and operations teams to help you create great software faster than ever. We are about a 400-person company growing every day, but we'd like to think we cover a wide net like some of our larger competitors. So we've got a very wide user base of 6.5 million across 194 countries in 22,000 companies, most, I would say, of the continents at this point. We're founded in Boston, Mass, just outside in Somerville, with 7 offices globally. So we try to cover as many time zones as we have customers in. We were founded in 2009, so we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary some point next year. I have to get the actual date. And we're very, very, very dedicated to our open source community. So we've donated SOAP UI and the Swagger specification to that open source community and still support it in some ways and still very much are dedicated to it. Some of our value points, we try, in addition to creating these tools for you all, our goals are to overall just help you accelerate your SDLC workflows, making sure you get from dev to test to operations and deployment that much quicker. Improve quality at every stage, meaning just release quicker and with less bugs and realize that rapid time to value. So we're basically just trying to save you some time and money in the long run. And isn't that what everyone wants? All right, so over here on the right, we've got some common types of, or common products within our portfolio, some names I'm sure that you recognize today, including SwaggerHub, maybe SOAP UI Pro if you have some experience with that. And of course, some of the test side of things, Test Complete, QA Complete, cross-browser testing, and alert site for your monitoring. And we'll be able to get into those a little bit at a higher level in just a second here. Perfect. All right. So we can see this is our breadth of our portfolio. Not to overwhelm anyone or take up too much of your time today, but I just wanted everyone to see sort of how our products are laid out as far as the software development lifecycle. So we've got that dev, test, ops stages of development. And we also have a number of tools for both the API which we're going to be covering today in an amount of form using the SwaggerHub tooling and talking about sort of the dev and design side of things. And we also have Collaborator and the UI tools as well for some similar products, right? For testing of our APIs, we've got what's called the Ready API suite of tools, and that includes SoapUI Pro for functional testing, Service V for virtualization and deployment of virtual services, and LoadUI Pro for performance testing. We have similar tooling on the UI side of things, so test complete, functional testing of that UI, automated integrations as well. CBT, cross-browser testing, so we can simulate and emulate different devices that your users are going to be running your applications on, and making sure that the application runs smoothly and displays correctly on those different devices without actually paying for the cost of those devices. We can actually emulate those in the cloud. And then Load Complete being our performance testing tool on the UI side of things. We pull all of these together in our management tool called QA Complete. So we can manage these different tests, manage requirements of our applications using that ALM tool. And we can also monitor your deployment and production environments using alert sites. We can actually bounce these tests that you've created in Test Complete, SoapUI Pro, Selenium scripts, things like that, against those services that you've created and the application that you've created using alert site. All right, down at the bottom, we also have a list of just some names of integrations that we have. We try to be as non-invasive to your environment and your pipeline as possible. And we do that with a lot of these open integrations. So you see a lot of common names here: GitHub, Jenkins, Jira, AWS. So we fit very nicely in the existing technologies that you use every single day. All right, so that was just a high-level introduction into SmartBear. Love to talk about it more in detail, but for now, let's get into the agenda for today. All right, awesome. So the first thing we're going to talk about the API ecosystem as we see it today, sort of the trends in the market. We're going to talk about some of the approaches to API development, some of the challenges that we hear our customers talk about every single day, and some of the things that we can overcome using SwaggerHub, just why we built it, and some of the things that we can improve upon using SwaggerHub for that process there. And then we're going to get into the demo and talk about the specific things. We've broken it down into different stages today, each with their own slide and visual representation. So we'll see how that's broken down nice and easily, and then see how that refers to the actual tool. Awesome. So let's get into talking about the API ecosystem.
I just made you the co-host.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, let me share my screen. Yes. This one, I believe. Perfect. All right. So this isn't going to tell us too much, but the way we see it is that APIs are becoming a more and more popular trend. More companies are API centric or trending towards that. IoT being a large trend, all these different devices communicating with each other. Your phone can talk to your car, can talk to your thermometer, can talk to your oven. And making sure all of those devices and all those applications communicate properly and effectively using APIs. That's sort of one of the bigger trends of the market, just making sure that all that runs smoothly and efficiently. So we've created a number of tools to help with quality, help with performance, and help remove dependencies and the sort of troubles with design and development of those APIs, right? And for the actual design, just starting from square one, what we tend to see is that there's some sort of business need, some sort of gap within the business, or something that you can create as far as a product goes, publicly facing. And this is usually comes from on high. Some sort of business analysts see this need, come up with a strategic document outlining what the application or the API needs to do, and how it can improve upon current business practices. And then this document is handed to the developers and say, hey, go build this, right? And then from there, those developers can take two different approaches, right? The first being the creating a service contract, what we call the design first approach. They create the Swagger document or what have you, outlining the functions and the what the API is going to do and how we'll interact with. And then we generate the server or client code framework based on that. And then the developers can begin building on top of that, with connecting the UI, connecting the backend, and creating all the business logic for the application. The other approach is the code first approach. They get that design document or strategic documentation outlining what the API needs to do, and then they go build the application. They start creating it from scratch. And then after the fact, they start generating the documentation from the code and create that contract and documentation. All right. So those are the two main approaches that we see, design first and code first. All right. The usual challenges that come with traditional, generally this code first approach, is the consistent design styles across these APIs. So all of your different developers are going to have different ways of approaching the same writing of the application, the terminology they use, the actual, syntax that they use. So it's hard to keep things consistent without enforcing some sort of strict validations on style and consistency there. Generally, there's also some confusion when collaborating through teams. It's hard to communicate effectively and make sure that people are being heard and things don't get lost in people's inboxes, or just emails and notes and things like that. So it's tough collaborating with these teams and making sure that ideas and corrections are made effectively. All right, and this overall translates into a loss of speed and time, especially when iterating through this design phase, making sure that the application or the API is the best version of itself before it gets pushed to the next stages. And because of this loss of acceleration when iterating and designing this application, it costs a lot of infrastructure when hosting and managing privacy and making sure that the loss of time doesn't always equate a loss of money as well. All right. And then on the other side, how we can help with SwaggerHub is that we, in one central platform, have a way to design, define, and develop our APIs and generate the documentation that goes along with it. That's all at the same time. We have a way of effectively collaborating with your different teams to share documentation securely, making sure it's all internal within your organization. Once you have your API design, you can generate your client and server framework SDKs. So you can start pushing to repositories and making sure that those SDKs are being coded on top of effectively in both internally and being consumed, right? We can manage this host of documentation for greater collaboration. So versioning, forking, merging, all these design methodologies for versioning and version control, right? And we have a lot of integrations to support this life cycle, making sure that on save it pushes to the proper gateway or it pushes to the repository tool. So we have a lot of these out of the box integrations to support these more automated or streamlined processes that you're looking to utilize. All right. So now that we've talked about some of the challenges for designing these APIs, we talked a little bit about how SwaggerHub can overcome and some of the ways that we can help improve upon these challenges and this process here. Let's get into our demo now. So we have a small story that we're going to be going through today. Somewhere in SmartBear has requested of me recreating a new HR app that's being developed across multiple platforms, and we need this Swagger definition. We need this API to help design that application, right? This API is required to retrieve and submit employee data from our database. And within our organization, we've got our architects, we've got our development team, and we have our QA team. And they're all going to need different permissions for creating this API and within SwaggerHub. As far as the design goes, this is just a brief sort of layout of our resource, that user's resource. We've got two different methods here, a get and a post with some parameters. And we've got some sample responses that we want to build out within SwaggerHub as well, right? So we've got two different 200 responses here, and we want that centralized standard 404 response as well. All right. So for phase one, this is going to be the intro, and we're going to get into the product in just a second. So we're going to talk about the UI, what you're going to be seeing when you first open the tool. We're going to talk about organizations and teams, and we're going to talk about working with projects. So this is just starting before we get into the editor, before we start playing around with the Swagger syntax. I just wanted to touch upon how we can get started in the tool and how we can get organized. All right, so let's move over to the tool. There we go. So this is one of the first things you see when you open up SwaggerHub, excuse me, and log in. This is what we call the My Hub view. In front of us, we've got the list. So this is the catalog of all the different APIs and designs that you're within the organization that your team is working on. Right. We can also search through this list, so we can search by name, right, and come up with all the different pet store APIs. We can also search by specific fields here and filter this out. So we can search by the Swagger 2.0 versus OpenAPI 3.0 specification. Right. We can search by API or domain, which is a reusable asset for our API designs, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation. We can search by visibility, so public facing versus private facing, external versus internal designs, and what you want to keep private versus publicly facing. And the state of the API, so published, unpublished, whatever's finished or meets the requirements originally set out, and what doesn't. So it's pretty straightforward as far as that goes, right? Then for organizations, which is our second topic within this phase here, I'm a part of two organizations. I'm a part of SmartBear Software and SE Design, and I'm an owner in SmartBear Software, right? If I go into the settings, organizations here, we can see how that's laid out. We can see how I have a little bit more control over the SmartBear Software organization, okay? And the organization is just your company or your team, like something you have a very specific name for, like SmartBear Software, for example, right? We're going to have all these different users, all these different collaborators on these designs, people who are simply just coming in and taking a look at the documentation for consumption. And we want to manage all these different users into their own specific team. So we've got our architects and our developers. They're going to need full permissions, full access to these designs. Our documentation team, maybe they'll have a little say on how it gets written, so they'll need some sort of commenting or collaboration permissions. And then for our consumers, all they need is to be able to see the documentation, see the design, and be able to create any sort of frameworks or make calls against the mock service. But they're not going to have that same kind of permission, same sort of design permissions. So we can restrict those within the design once we get into it as well. All right. And then the last thing I want to talk about is not only are we able to organize and manage our different users within our organization, we can also do the same with the designs and documents themselves. So we use that using these projects here, excuse me. We can see over here on the left, I've got these different little folder icons with names, and these are our projects. Our projects being the actual domains and designs of these APIs, right? And we can create a new project very simply, just giving it a name, adding APIs and designs that we want to bring into this, and then inviting those different users. So it's very simple to get started and get more organized. And the reason why you would want to create a project is that you want to separate your different designs, separate your different teams, separate your public facing versus privately facing, or designs that are finished and published, meet initial requirements and ready to go out into the wild, versus ones that your team is still working on and designing and developing on. All right, so there are a few different ways to get started within the tool, different ways of getting organized within the tool through the organization and the management of these different users using our teams, as well as managing these different designs themselves using our projects. All right, so let's go back to the slides. So we can see how our different team members are going to be interacting with this design. And then let's move on. So we're going to be getting into it, talking about the editor, actually starting to write this Swagger definition. So we're going to create that new definition. We're going to talk about applying our teams to that specific design and what kind of privacy we can set. As we start writing this API, we're going to take a look at the documentation gets created alongside of it and gets updated in real time. And we're going to talk about one of our collaboration features in commenting. So we're able to comment in line, and we'll be able to see how that works out. All right. So if we go back to SwaggerHub, and just for a moment so I don't keep pausing, I'm just going to take a drink. All right, so let's get into it then. There are a few ways we can get started within the tool. So we can create a new API from scratch. You can bring in your existing Swagger JSON or YAML definitions. And I'm not going to get into this, but we can also incorporate a tool called Swagger Inspector. So if you wanted to create a Swagger design using an existing application, we can use Swagger Inspector, which is a free tool to record transactions, be able to see the requests and the responses, how those are formatted, the different parameters that are in those URLs, and be able to create a Swagger definition based on that, and bring that into SwaggerHub directly after you sign up to SwaggerHub. All right. So those are a few different ways we can get into the tool. For now, I'm going to create a new API from scratch, so we're all, at the same level and everyone, knows how to get started. All right. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple for now. I'm just going to be using the 2.0 version of Swagger, or the Open API spec. There are a few different templates you can start from scratch on if you want an existing example that you want to build on top of. So the pet store definition is a pretty popular one. We've got IoT, or if you want to be implementing OAuth 2.0, we've got a few examples there. Right. But continuing on with our user story, we're going to create that HR API. I'm just going to go off of version 1. This is going to be, version 1. Our title. And our description being users, host, get user info to database. All right. For now, I'm just going to keep this private. I'm going to turn off AutoMock API. We'll get into that later once we talk about sort of our integrations. And this is going to be under SmartBear software. All right. So over here on the left, we have our editor. So this is actually how we're going to be writing our definitions and using that Swagger syntax. We can use JSON or YAML. I'm going to keep it with YAML because it's a little bit more concise. And over here on the right, we have this. This is our documentation view here. So once we create resources and methods and parameters and things like that, that'll get that filled out automatically to create the documentation along with the actual Swagger definition there. All right. Before I get into that, though, I just wanted to talk about some of the collaboration for this. So, like I said before, we've got our API architects and developers, and we want them to have full access to this API: view, comment, edit. Right. For our documentation team, maybe we don't want them to directly edit this API, make any meaningful changes, but maybe we want their input. So we want to have them comment. And then for our consumers, again, pretty straightforward. Like I said before, we don't want them to edit or comment, but at the very least, you want them to view. So this is how we can apply these permissions based on their teams. And for any users that you want to come into the tool directly, we can invite them by their username, or we can invite them by the email that they signed up with. Oh, there's that little drop down. Just want to show that off real quick. Okay, so there's a drop down here that says, with a button that says invite. So we can invite those users via email and bring them in to start collaborating on this. But I think I typed that too quickly. All right. So this is how we can actually apply those permissions that we create, apply our different teams on this design here and directly and very quickly and easily. All right. All right. So now that we've talked about privacy and the different roles and teams and applying those, let's get into the actual design and see how things start to change as I start typing this definition here. So we've got our users resource. We've got our get method. And for those who are paying attention, we can see that this dropdown and this, yeah, here we go. So SwaggerHub starts to help us create this definition with these little snippets here. So for those who are a little less familiar with Swagger, they can get started just as easily as the rest of us. Right? And I've got a description here that I'm just going to use for our summary. Very similar to what we typed into our API description here for this method here. All right. We also have a sample response down here at the bottom. This is nice, but it's not quite what we want to be doing. So I'm going to flesh this out a little bit more and add some a schema. So we've got an object here. This is going to be our type. And our response also has some properties here as well. like a status, like UUID, and we got a first name, last name, and email. But I'm just going to keep it basic for now. I'm just going to use the status. It is an integer. Open this up. There we go. And our example is 200. All right, so we can see over here on the right how things are starting to get written. This documentation is starting to flesh out a little bit more. We've got parameters that we can add if we want to add, some sort of something within the query, like a first name or last name or employee ID. And then we can add those properties and examples and add descriptions to those to flesh out a sample response that we want our users to look at, so they can have some sort of realistic expectation of what this API is going to give back to you if they make calls against it. All right. Yeah, so for the sake of brevity, I'm going to flesh this out. I'm just going to copy and paste this definition. There we go. And then we also need this definition down here. All right, once, yep. So the errors are clear. They'll be up at the top if anything occurs, so you actually know precisely, based on syntax and the way you're writing it, what went wrong and things like that. The last thing I wanted to talk about is commenting, so we'll get back to that. Let's say we're working on this definition. It's late in the day. You want to make sure before you go home this is being reviewed properly. Maybe you forgot something. I don't know. Let's say forgot a last name parameter here, right? So we'll delete that. You can make a comment on specific lines here using this plus button. So if everyone can see my mouse, this opens up a comment. So we are saying that we're going to create this comment in line 49. And then we're going to ask one of our users, can you review this doc or this, this schema here. All right. From there, we're going to add that comment. We can see this little box here with the 1 over here on the left, how that's created. And then this sends an email out to everyone who's collaborating on this design. So you can do a little bit of management of your different users and how you collaborate and work on this API design here. And then from here, your manager, your team lead, or whoever can say, you're missing a last name. And then for a moment, you act really embarrassed and then just create the last name object here and then call it a day. Right. Oh, there we go. And then make sure to indent properly. This is one second, folks.
While Mike is working on that, just a reminder that he'll take a break in a little bit to answer any questions that come through. So you can just go right into the Q&A box to ask some questions. And we did have some questions come through the chat about the recording. This is being recorded. You will receive, anyone who registered, if you attended or didn't attend, will receive the replay video tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, whatever time that is in your time zone. 24 hours after this session, you'll get the replay. So hopefully that answers some questions, and any other additional questions that you have come through, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dana. Yeah, so just copied and pasted the wrong thing in there. So we figured this out. We're done. What we did is we that comment here, right? It's still open. So now that we've created this, we're going to resolve this comment. That's going to be archived here. Right? So we get to save historically all these different comments and how we review this and changes that we need to make to this API directly. All right, so that is the end of phase 2 here. Just to quick recap. So we talked about getting started within the tool, the different ways we can create these API definitions. We started from scratch. We talked about applying these different roles and team privacy, and read-write permissions for these different users. We talked about, as we were writing the documentation and the Swagger, we saw that live documentation over on the right, update in real time, and any errors popped up, they're going to pop up at the top, so we know things that went wrong. And we also talked a little bit about commenting as well, making sure that we can send messages to our team for review or to double check or add things, get ideas, just overall good collaboration by commenting inline there, and being able to reply and then finally archive those comments. All right, so with that out of the way, we can move on to phase 3, reusing these different assets here, creating these domains, defining our different components, and referencing these shared resources. Right? And this is a really, really awesome part of the tool. This is what really sets us apart. So whether you can see it or not, I'm just going to go over this really quickly. So something that is baked into Swagger is the idea of a local definition. So something that we can reuse over and over again within these different methods that we created. In this case, it's a 400 response, just a 400 error code with a message that says bad request. And we can see this being applied to both of our methods here, right? What we can do within SwaggerHub is take this a step further. So we have the idea of domains, which I'll go to another example here very quickly. So instead of, that's fine. Instead of having to recreate these local definitions over and over again within our APIs, and referencing them in multiple methods here, we can create our domain, which takes the idea of that local definition, brings it out into a separate file. All right, so we have all these different objects here. In this case, for our library API, we've got a book, we've got multiple books, and we've got authors, right? And then we can take this object that we've created here and import that into the definition. And while that doesn't seem powerful right now, all it is just a URL with a reference to that domain file. This is something that can be used across all the APIs within and without the organization, or within the organization rather. Right, so this book object can be created once within that domain. It's going to have a standardized way of what that book object looks like, what properties it has, examples, things like that. And then using this URL, you can just import that into all these different APIs here. So this is a nice way of taking this single reusable approach for designing these APIs and just applying that reference there within the design itself, right? And then we are able to do the same kind of versioning as we can within our APIs and sort of take this top-down approach and standardized way of having these error models or different objects that we want returned within our APIs here. All right. So let's go back to our definition that we were working on. Okay. The way that we can bring this in is instead of, again, that local definition, making that reference, is with control and space. And there we go. So normally, like I said before, it's just a URL to that that object within the domain. And using control and space, you're going to be able to take a look at these different domains that are available within the organization here. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So take a look at that. There we go. So we're going to save this, backtrack a little bit, and you know, not to put too fine a point on it, but a domain and the idea of these reusable assets and having this single standardized defined object here within our designs. This is a really powerful part of the tool, and it's a nice way of not only making your designs quicker, but standardizing your different objects and components within these API designs across the entire organization. Right. All right. So now that I've laid out that concept for everyone, and we can always go back to it if anyone has any additional questions, let's get into our next phase. So publishing these APIs, versioning, and doing a little bit more of fork and merge workflow, making sure that once initial requirements are fulfilled, we want to publish our APIs, and then any additional requirements that come in after the fact, we can create a new version and add upon our original design here without having to overwrite all of our work. All right. So now that we've created this API, and it, based on the slides that we took a look at earlier, it's got our two methods, it's got an input and an output, and it's got a localized 400 response. That fits our initial requirements. So let's publish this. All right, we're going to make this a static copy now, so no one's able to create any additional edits because it's finished. But let's say at some point, we are able to get users, we're able to post users, but the team is requesting that we're able to update users that we add to our database. So we're going to need a new method, and we're also going to create a new version of this API. So this is going to be a 1.1.0 version of the API. We're going to create that. And so this read-only message is taken away. So we do know that we're able to make changes to this. And if we want to go back and take a look at how this API changed over time, sort of the things that we've done to it over the different versions and iterations, we always have access to that. So we're able to switch back and forth between those different versions, right? And then we also have the ability to break out this version, fork it under different ownership. So for example, let's say that we need to make this new method. That's one of our requirements, right? My time and my team is taken elsewhere. We're going to finish up a different project or start a new project. And then we're going to bring in some sort of contractor, some third party to come in and finish our work. Pretty common within the industry there. So we're going to fork this API. I'm going to bring it under my personal ownership here. Private API, public. There we go. And then under my personal account, I'm going to make those changes. And then we'll talk about how we can merge those changes back to the original version. Right? So I'm going to add this post method, this put method, excuse me. There we go. Down here at the bottom. we go. We can see how that's updated now. We're going to save this. There we go. And we want to be able to bring back those changes and do some comparing of those two different designs there. So we're going to go to the compare and merge API feature. I'm going to navigate to my username and the actual design. Perfect. And normally you would call this, this is the fork of the original version, right? But we can actually see how it's, the ownership or the different designs here are under different ownership, actually. They're not. So I'm going to go back to this one and search for that again. Perfect. All right. So as I scroll down, we can see the different versions. We can see this new method that I added. This is highlighted in green. If I click on it, we can see how that's brought in to the other API here. All right. So we can add any additional changes. Those are going to be highlighted. Just click on those and then merge them over. Anything that you want to bring in to the forked design here, or any other API that you're searching for, right? We can bring over all the metadata or just the bare bones itself if you want to add the metadata yourself. And then we save those changes and it's added to the API here. All right. So this is a really good way of having an internal way of versioning, keeping track of historical changes, requirements that are given to you over time, and being able to take this design under your own ownership or any third party that's coming in and finishing up a project, being able to make those changes and then having a review in place to have a physical or graphical representation of the differences between those two designs. And then you just click and choose which parts of the design that you want to bring in. So it's a nice way of being able to manage the different versions and incorporate other teams into this design. All right. So we're doing really well on time. I'm going to cover this last phase, which is our integrations. It's always the most exciting and always the thing that people have the most questions on. So we're going to run through that pretty quickly and then spend the last 10, 15 minutes going through any additional questions. All right. So what we're going to talk about is our integrations with third-party tools. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, SmartBear makes it a point to have a lot of flexibility as far as our integrations going and the types of tooling that you're working with today, and being able to incorporate that in existing pipelines and development styles. So we're going to talk about first our style validator, which is a great way of taking this standardized approach to API design. One of our challenges being all these different developers have different ways of writing and approaching the code and the actual syntax that they use. So we have this nice way of creating a consistent method of designing these APIs, having them written very similarly. Very good for this for consistency and how the design looks from an outside point of view. All right. We're going to talk about our integrations with gateways and version control tools. So we can see up here, we have this little AutoCAD for GitHub. And that's certainly one of our integrations, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Right. We can also create code SDKs, these frameworks that you can stand up right out of the box and start developing on top of. And then we're also going to talk about API auto mocking, how with a couple of clicks, we can stand up a mock version of this service that we've created and start hitting it right away. All right. So getting back into it, let's go into our new version of the API. Okay. So the way that we can get started though with those is with our integrations button, that little icon, little plug there. Let me see. Let's make this public. There we go. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the style validator. Like I said before, it's a way to keep consistency across your definitions and designs, and it's just a set of rules that you want to be enforcing, right? So we can enforce small things like underscore case versus camel case. So the actual syntax and the way that these APIs get written. And then for more important, just best practices rules as well. So all of your properties must have examples, right? So that little example output JSON body that we saw within the documentation, we want to be able to enforce that, have users coming in see what sample outputs are created. APIs must not have local definitions. So the enforcement of these domains, reusable assets, making sure that designs are a little bit more consistent, and just making sure that descriptions are enforced, having contacts there for anyone who wants to contact the creator, and little things like that, right? There's a little bit more flexibility and on these validations and in style here. On the on-premise version of the tool. And please reach out to your customer success or account manager for more details there. All right, so this style validator is just a nice way of making consistent and style-based rules for collaboration and consistency across your entire organization in how it's written. All right. The next one that I want to talk about is some of the heavy hitters within the industry. So our API gateways that we're able to push to our version control tools. So for example, with GitHub here, when I save this design, I want to be able to push this design and there we go, GitHub. Push this design to my repo, and not only can I push the design, so that JSON or YAML definition, but I can also push my client or server side SDKs as well. So I have a nice way of going from the initial design phase right into development by pushing this code framework that I can pull down from my repository tool, already have a management tool in place in GitHub, and then start developing it nice and easily. All right. And then we'll get into some of the more details on generating that API code. All right. So this is something we can sync with any changes and on save using that API lifecycle. We can make sure that the repo gets updated consistently there. And speaking of those SDKs, like I said before, and I keep saying, we integrate with these common types of technologies that people are developing today. So we can take this definition, we can create a Node.js server, right? It already has specific routes created based on that Swagger documentation. All it needs is the business logic of connecting those routes to those pages, connecting the UI to that. So it's just an API. We need something to render out to the front end using those calls. And then we also need that connection to the back end. But what SwaggerHub is able to generate is a very intuitive and nice start in these client or server-side SDKs. Right. And then the last integration I wanted to talk about is the API auto-mocking tool. This is a pretty powerful one. I would say this is something we show off pretty consistently when we're talking to different customers. So when we create this, the change, you can't see it immediately, but what it allows you to do is actually try it out. So interact with the documentation directly here. I'm able to put in a field using that UUID, hit execute, and it gives us a URL and a curl command to actually hit this service here and get back our example response. Right? So what I'm showing off is this curl command. So we can see how we're getting back that response. And this is really powerful. This allows anyone coming into the tool to be able to make these calls, get back something, a sample response, see how this, start getting a good idea on how you can interact with this API. This is good for our testers to start creating those initial unit tests or validations against this JSON body here, making sure it has the right information based on the definition that we've created. And this is also good for our UI team. So we're able to, from this mock service here, make calls using a piece of code in the front end and start rendering some sample data to it, making sure that it renders properly and it's formatted nicely on the page there. So this is a really powerful piece, and it allows a wide range of roles to interact with this API very easily there. All right. So that is the majority of what I wanted to talk about. So our style validation, the different gateways and version control tools that we interact with, client and server-side SDKs, and API mocking.
I do see a question that just came through for Mike. While it's a little bit of a longer one, I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at it right now. So Gregory asks if there is support for merging or referencing multiple Swagger definitions into a single documentation. Our public-facing API grows more and more challenging for the developers to review. We'd like to break it out into separate files to improve reviews, share definitions, put documents. So from my understanding, you want to take a large definition and break it down into its individual component parts, right? So you're able to, at the very least, import that document directly within the tool. We talked a little bit about that. But then, honestly, there's not a whole lot we can do after that. But utilize what we've shown you today using domains, making those references to the different objects, sharing those across your definitions, and just start breaking it out on your own. So while there's no specific surefire way or easy solution to this, use what you've learned today, experiment on your own, and then start breaking things out and utilizing those domains.
Have a good rest of the day, everyone.